What's up, Wildside besties and baddies? I'm Bailey.
And I'm Chelsea, and we're here to walk you through the wild sides.
From homicides to hosticides and everything in between.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride. And it is time for part 2.
Round two of the cultiness.
Yeah. Y'all asked for this. You're gluttons for punishment.
I know.
So as a real quick recap, we started off with the Angel's Landing cult and how it kind of got on police radar. Couldn't figure out who Lou Castro was. Turns out it was Daniel Perez from Texas, who everybody thought was dead. He had been sexually assaulting girls forever. And as the investigation closed in, he was charged as John Doe for fraud. And so where we kind of left it, he was in federal prison under John Doe.
Oh, and they only have like 2 years to get all their ducks in a row before he is released.
Yeah.
Until he's finished his time.
Yeah. And the very last thing that we left off with was the beginning of like the breaks in the case and when they found that hard drive.
Oh, right. When they drained that lagoon area and found the hard drive.
Yeah. And so to pick this back up, this hard drive discovery was a huge critical piece of evidence. But the nail in the coffin would come on March 15th, 2011. And so this is going to be the absolute turning point in the investigation. And it comes in a really dramatic way when a courageous young woman stepped forward to investigators. And this witness is who I will refer to as E.H. And because of her status as a victim of sexual crimes, her identity remains confidential. I'm sure we could find it somewhere, but I kind of say why at this point. So E.H. by 2003 was a woman in her 20s. And she recounted to detectives how at the tender age of just 10 years old, she and her sister were brought to the compound by their mother. And remember, this compound was the home to Angel's Landing, the isolative enclave inhabited by a group that referred to themselves as the family.
Yes. Which, why is it that all cults don't ever have like a clever name, right? Like it's always just like the family. I mean like the group, the family. I'm like, they can't ever come up with anything original.
Yeah, as far as their group name, they save all of the originality for themselves, as cult leaders, being a centuries-old reincarnated special demon fighter angel or whatever.
Yeah, demon fighter. Kind of like a gladiator almost. Man, don't you know he was so cool in his own mind?
Yeah. And this witness, known as E.H., she shared that Lou Castro had been a customer of her mother's in Kansas City, Missouri area. And soon after her mother met Lou, because her mother was a real estate agent, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. But as soon after her mother met Lou, E.H.'s mother decided to separate and divorce from their father. And the girls moved to Wichita with their mother, living with and next to Lou Castro and his entourage.
Hashtag yuck.
They all ended up at what became, again, this 20-acre compound, 3 houses and a pool. E.H.'s mother was struck by this man telling her 2 young daughters that he was, quote, a seer and would, quote, take care of us, and she wanted to be with him. Again, he claimed that he was this century-old, hundreds of years old spiritual being in a body of a 30-something-year-old, and he was like 50. This unsettling community thrived on the proceeds of life insurance policies stemming from the deaths of its members, as we've talked about, creating a chilling atmosphere where life and death intertwined. Fearful of the man known as Lou Castro, EH revealed that compliance was her only means to survival. And this is where things start to get a little bit gritty.
Oh, I hate it so much. I hate it so much.
She lived in constant terror of him, coupled with a misguided belief in his alleged supernatural abilities. As a 10-year-old, you're being told that this man has supernatural abilities. How could you possibly combat that in any way?
No. I mean, exactly.
Over the years, from the moment she was 10 years old, Castro subjected EH to horrific acts of rape and sexual abuse. EH's mother had ingrained in her, again, that Castro was the seer with the ability to glimpse the future. And once again, how terrifying, because in the mind of a 10-year-old, I can't do anything to stop or run away or fight back because he can see into the future. He already knows what I'm going to do, right? And in order for him to protect them, he needed pureness like a young girl. So, EH, with this deeply rooted belief system, she felt compelled to follow his every instruction, trapped in a disturbing reality that blurred the lines between protection and manipulation.
I just, I really, it's so hard for me to understand how people can be that just awful on so many levels. Like, it's really hard for me to compute this information.
It gets worse. EH unveiled harrowing revelations about the dark underpinnings of the Angel's Landing cult and how Castro had coerced her into concocting a fabricated story for the authorities. So this is where EH starts to spill the beans about what really happened to Trish.
Do we know why she decided to come forward? Do we know what compelled her to come forward? Was it maybe learning that he was in prison?
That's a part of it.
Mhm.
And there was something that her sister, we're going to get more into her sister in a little bit. Um, just how they got to the point of, from my interpretation of, like, we were afraid of him and he controlled us for so many years. This was our opportunity to regain our own control and autonomy.
Yeah. Okay.
So EH shared with Detective Goodwin that before Patricia Hughes died in 2003 in what was generally considered and was ruled an accidental drowning at the compound, Lou Castro told her that Trish would die. In a conversation held about a week prior to Trish's tragic death, Castro Perez ominously declared, quote, "It is Trish's time to go, and she is going to cross over."
Which again, if you're a seer and if
Right.
you make everything look like an accident, then it's like it gives him validity to the lies that he's
Literally.
spreading. Like it's giving him he's creating his own power.
Yeah.
Which and I think that's what's what's so hard is it is brilliant, right? These people really are smart. It's and I'm like, if you would use that, like you're obviously talented and smart, but why you choose to use it for bad, I don't get that.
Well, it's like the spectrum of psychopaths, right? Most psychopaths are not violent serial killers. Most of them are very successful businessmen and women or entrepreneurs,
That's true. That's a great
right?
point.
And so that's an example of just, you might not think the same way, or you might not have the same type of emotions or emotional expression that other kind of bell-shaped curve people do, but you're building million and billion dollar businesses. You're not taking lives, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's no surprise that Perez predicted that Trisha's death would be an accident, claiming that she would fall into the pool at the compound. He further explained that he couldn't be nearby during this event because being close to someone crossing over would risk attracting the angel's attention and result in his own demise.
No comment.
The witness, so EH, further recalled that even Trish reassured her, telling her that, quote, "It's okay, it's my time, you'll see me later," insinuating that her death was a part of a larger cycle where she would return. So Trish was manipulated and brainwashed into believing that she was going to come back in a healthier, different state of herself.
No. No, Bailey, no.
Both Perez and Trish urged EH to keep their ominous predictions a secret. And how huge of a burden for a 10-year-old to carry that kind of secret.
I mean, at this point, it's so compounded. It's like, I can't imagine how big of the burden A, B, C, you know what I mean? Like, this poor kid is getting hit from every angle, right?
Yeah. And so finally, on June 26, 2003, this chilling prophecy unfolded exactly as Perez had described. Others at the compound were gone or heading to an auto dealership to look at vehicles. Perez told EH, that it was time for Trish to pass on, reassuring her while she was in tears, saying she didn't want Trish to die. He was sitting there reassuring her that everything was going to be okay. EH walked with Perez, Trish, and Trish's 2-year-old daughter to the pool. Trish again reassures EH, telling her, "It will be fine. Don't worry about me. Just take care of my daughter. I'll be back before you know it." According to an article by Tim Potter, Perez told EH to wait by the toddler in a shop by the pool for 20 minutes and that he would come and get her. He told her to take the 2-year-old outside and jump in the pool with the toddler to make sure that the toddler got wet. While waiting in the shop where she couldn't see the pool, what she's telling investigators is that she heard a splash and thought she heard what was a scream. When Perez came back, his forearms were wet, but not his clothes, and he seemed out of breath as if he had been jogging. The words that EH used to describe him was he really looked worried, kind of sad, and kind of flustered. Perez instructed EH to wait some time so he could get to the dealership before having her call 911. Finally, after waiting about 20 minutes, EH emerged from the shop with the toddler. She sees Trish floating face down in the shallow end of the pool. And as instructed, she took the toddler into the water to get wet, got out, and then called 911. EH then told the rehearsed story over and over that Patricia Hughes had slipped and hit her head trying to rescue her child. When the paramedics arrived, they were surprised to find Trish floating in the shallow end of the pool instead of submerged in the deep end.
I mean,
Trish
they're not that smart, aren't they? You know what I mean? Like, there's always going to be cracks in your plan.
Right. Trish was eventually pronounced dead, and an autopsy combined with the witness reports provided regarding the circumstances of her death determined that the death, as we had talked about, was an accidental drowning. Now, by this time that EH is telling this story to investigators, because this is a story that she had stuck to since the reports varied since she was 10 or 12 years old, because she was terrified. She was absolutely terrified of Perez. She said that she eventually had stopped talking to Perez whenever he went to prison and finally realized how he was still controlling her, kind of like what I told you earlier. And she didn't want to be controlled anymore. And that's why she decided to come forward and tell the truth to investigators.
Yeah. Yeah.
The gravity of EH's testimony not only intensified the urgency of their investigation, but it illuminated a path that could finally get, hopefully, some justice for the forgotten victims. With this newfound insight, the detectives felt the weight of responsibility. The chilling narrative of a child caught in a web of a nefarious organization summoned their resolve to delve deeper into the Angel's Landing cult, determined to uncover everything that they could. They knew with EH's testimony, they had proof that Daniel Perez had motive, means, and opportunity to murder Patricia Hughes.
Well, and I wonder if the motivation for his timeline was when they started getting low on cash, right? So it makes me wonder if it's like, okay, well, we're starting to get low. We probably need to kill somebody and cash in their life insurance.
Yeah, so we're going to get to that kind of whenever we get to what starts to pour out in the trial phase. But essentially, what investigators say, or the prosecution says, is when the bank account reaches $10,000, another death would happen,
Oh, mm-hmm.
right? Like, hey, our funds are running low. So, I'm having another vision that another person is going to die, but not really die because they're going to come back in, a better form of themselves. And so these people are literally thinking that they're not dying, you know? It's just horrific, Chelsea.
It's her. I mean, I think that's a perfect word. It really is horrific.
And thank you to EH's testimony. Again, they finally had what they needed to build a strong murder case. Based on the investigations and police interviews, Daniel Perez was charged in Sedgwick County District Court on September 11th, 2011, with first-degree murder for the death of Patricia Hughes, along with many other counts that I'm not going to say yet because it's going to give it all away. The complaint was later amended and proceeded to trial on one count of first-degree premeditated murder. So even though they were on track for getting Perez for murder, there was still a big sense of urgency. There was fear that Perez once again might kind of slip through the crack on a technicality at court, or something could happen, right? That's terrifying when you have so much at stake.
Sure. Yeah.
Detective Goodwin's fear was that Perez would get out of federal prison before they could charge him with murder and all of these other sex crimes.
Well, and I think the one thing that really ties there are a lot of similarities or parallels between cult cases and cult activity and like mob and mafia is so often the leaders don't actually do the
The
dirty
dirty ones? Yeah.
And that's what's so hard is it's like you can't necessarily pin a lot of stuff onto the leaders because
Right.
they don't do it. Right. And I know
Right.
that there's ways around that. I know that you can you're an accomplice and yada, yada, yada. But yeah, I can see how that would be a scary thing where it's like, what if someone finds a loophole and is able to be like, well, I mean, technically he didn't do it.
Yeah. And, or literally, we covered a case, I don't remember which one it was, but because of differing language on the arrest versus like the paper submitted at court, it was like a wash. You couldn't proceed with that. So there are so many technical steps in this process. And we talked about how, Perez was in federal prison for these 2 years, and Goodwin was just starting to panic, right? Because this is a slow process. And so he kept calling the federal prison to make sure, like all the time, regularly, to make sure that like Perez wasn't being released, like that he didn't know about. With a cloud of uncertainty looming, there was, however, a glimmer of hope when the Sedgwick County prosecutors finally filed murder charges on January of 2012, setting the stage for a long-awaited pursuit of justice. According to an article by James Bennett When Perez's sentence for ID fraud was finished, he was arrested on 28 counts of first-degree murder, child exploitation, and multiple counts of sex crimes and fraud.
28 counts of murder?
28 counts total, including first-degree murder, child exploitation, multiple counts of sex crimes and fraud.
Okay. Still bad.
Yeah, sorry, I should have
Still
clarified
bad.
that.
But
Yeah.
okay.
And it would take 3 years, Chelsea, it would take 3 years until the trial commenced in early 2015. So when this trial finally kicked off, testimonies from former members revealing years of manipulation, abuse, and financial exploitation would be shared with the court. The prosecution began by providing an overview of Daniel Perez's abuse and manipulation. They talked about how Daniel Perez and all of his aliases, mostly known as Lou Castro to his followers, began attracting his followers by claiming to have special powers, including the ability to heal the sick and predict the future. He convinced people that he was, again, an ancient supernatural being, using this to control and manipulate his followers.
Yeah.
The prosecution shared how he had gathered a small but very devoted and very loyal group of followers on this 20-acre property in Kansas known as Angel's Landing.
Yeah.
Since Daniel Perez had been incarcerated, several members of the Angel's Landing cult began to cooperate with investigators and eventually became willing to testify for the prosecution. A number of witnesses include S.H., who was Sarah McGrath, and we're going to talk a lot about her. Daniel McGrath, which is Sarah's husband, and he was the one that sent that letter to the FBI saying, hey, my wife was in this cult and there's a lot of stuff going on. You need to investigate it.
Right.
A person by the name KL, a witness by the name of EH, which is Sarah's sister, a friend of Daniel Perez named Philip, Michelle, who was the daughter of Marilyn in Maryland. Remember earlier on in 1996 where he sexually assaulted the daughter and the mom filed charges?
Yes.
David, who was Sarah McGrath's stepfather. Megan, who was Perez's baby mama as of December of 2004. So he ended up having a daughter in 2004. A woman by the name of Sherry Cox and her daughter Cece, who was just 8 years old at the time she was introduced to the cult. So all of these people became witnesses for the state.
And I think that right there really shows you how powerful, yet how feeble that power is. In that, if you think about it, it's like, how could someone believe that they could be impregnated by a 300-year-old angel demon fighter? You know what I mean? Like, and we've talked about the manipulation and the coercion and all that stuff and how you can like, oh my gosh, I mean, yeah, I know it's crazy, but yes. But then when you finally get them away from it, again, how, not that it's easy to break necessarily, but once they get away from it, I'm sure that's when they have moments of clarity where it's like, you know what? I mean, really, how could I even get pregnant by a 300-year-old angel demon fighter? But you have to get away from it in order to have that clarity.
So, unpopular statement, just to play devil's advocate, I mean, the Virgin Mary gave birth to the Messiah, right? And that sounds crazy that a virgin gives birth to God's son.
Yeah, but there aren't multiple virgins who have given multiple births. You know what I mean? Like,
no, but I'm just saying, like, if I just want to get super technical and look at this again from just a devil's advocate perspective, and I'm not hating on any sort of belief system, I'm just saying in this case, if you, let's say you grew up in the world of Christianity and you're taught that miracles happen and you're taught that a virgin gave birth to God's son, right? And these other things happen. Who's the homegirl that looked back and turned to salt?
Lot's wife.
Yeah, right? Like she looked over her shoulder when God told her not to, and she just turned into salt. So arguably, right, these people, even maybe if they even grew up with the doctrine of Christianity being their religion, they've already been conditioned to believe stuff like this can happen.
Yeah. And that's fair. But again, I think that's where knowledge, like genuine, accurate knowledge comes into play, right? Where it's like, but that's a whole nother tangent. But I know what I'm saying is I get that. Like, I get what you're saying. But my point was not the whole like miracle status. My point was how powerful, but yet how feeble that power is once you're away from it, right? It's powerful
Yeah.
while you're in it, but once you step away from it, you're just like, oh man, okay, I can think clearly. I can see the manipulation for what
Oh,
it
sure.
is. That was my
Sure. I
whole
mean,
point.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it takes kind of getting away to gain clarity, which is why it's unethical for therapists to provide counseling services to close friends and family because you don't see clearly.
Sure, sure.
The state also brought in the insurance agents and the cars salesmen to who sold the group their policies, testifying, about the life insurance payouts and the deaths that followed. Now, one of the things that the prosecution made sure to make very clear is that even though Daniel Perez was the puppet master behind all of this, he was never actually named the beneficiary, right? So arguably, and that's why this case is so sticky, right? Like you were talking about finding loopholes, because his defense team argued that he wasn't the beneficiary, so how could this be a motive for him, right?
Right. Yeah.
Prosecutors painted a picture that whenever the group's bank account dipped below 10,000, it was time for another death, and that's what investigators learned to be the pattern in Colt's Landing. The payout after Patricia Hughes's death was over $1 million. And Philip, another person kind of involved in Angel's Landing, testified that in March of 2006, after Brian Hughes left to his trip to South Dakota, Daniel Perez told Philip that he did not think Brian would return.
He had another vision.
He had another vision, and he was correct. Brian was killed in that accident in South Dakota.
Yeah, with the car crushing him, falling off.
Yes. The prosecution noted, right, and pushed for people to understand how these followers were vulnerable individuals who were drawn to Perez's promises of spiritual enlightenment and protection. He promised his followers financial gain, spiritual enlightenment, protection, and then subjugated them to physical, sexual abuse.
Well, and he justified that as well, it sounded like, with saying that he needed pure, almost like pure sacrifices, right? In order for him to be able to continue, like you're taking one for the team because he can't take care
Sure.
of the team if he doesn't have his pure 10-year-old virgins that he can.
Ugh,
I know.
yeah.
It's awful. It's
Yeah.
like to say it out loud, it's just like, oh.
Several of Angel's Landing surviving followers were called to testify throughout the trial. And Chelsea, they painted an absolute horror story that seems just honestly too unbelievable to be true. They shared how Perez, again, was this centuries-old seer who could tell the future, whose body was inhabited by angels, but most specifically that he had to have sex with young girls to stay alive. The Kansas Bureau of Investigation's Sex Offender Registry shows the girls who were victims of his numerous child sex crimes ranged in age from 8 to 16.
Oh, I have such a hard time having empathy for those situations.
Yeah. In an article by Jason Tidd, one surviving cult member, now a witness for the prosecution, testified that, quote, I was 10 when my childhood was over. While other 10-year-olds were riding bikes or playing with dolls, I was laying naked in a bed with a pillow over my head, just waiting for it to be over. While other 13-year-olds were getting boyfriends and holding hands, I was holding on to my secret and losing the people I loved one by one. When other 16-year-olds were experiencing the freedom of learning how to drive and planning parties with their friends, I was planning my own death every day when I drove to school.
But it's just,
Two main witnesses for the prosecution were the daughters of Jennifer Hudson, EH and SH. Now, remember, Jennifer was the real estate agent, and she tragically died in 2008 in a car accident,
in the car
right?
accident, she was the beneficiary of,
Yeah.
or the guardian of Patricia's daughter. Is that correct?
Yes. She was actually the agent that found the Angel's Landing compound for Perez. So that's
Mm,
specifically how she met him.
okay.
And during this process, he manipulated her, totally sucking her into, his teachings and his visions and all of this stuff.
Right.
Her daughter, Sarah, said that she and her family joined the commune, the cult, after Perez met her mother in 2001 when Sarah was about 17 at the time. During the trial, Sarah, who was a key witness for the prosecution, expressed her fear when confronting Perez in court to testify against him. She described the experience as extremely scary and shared her concerns and her uncertainty about her ability to go through with the testimony. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
with the support of the district attorney, his assistant, and her husband, she did find the strength to testify, contributing to the case against him.
Yeah.
One thing she shared was, my mom had a journal and she had written how she felt she needed to protect Lou, or Daniel. I guess he appeared innocent or as someone who cared too much. My mother was very thoughtful when it came to people, so she felt like she somehow needed to protect him. He was very charismatic and quite the talker. He somehow appeared wise.
Yeah. Good for her for
And,
keeping a journal.
there it is, Chelsea. Look,
I
just for
know.
you.
I know.
Sarah testified that in the beginning of her sister, and her mom moving to the compound, it was a huge support system and everybody was very close. She said in the beginning, things were all fine and dandy, but it didn't take long for things to turn.
Yeah.
When asked when she first realized something wasn't right within the compound, Sarah responded with, probably the first time that Lou raped me. She testified that she was raped by Daniel Perez, quote, hundreds of times.
Oh.
She also explained how Perez ordered her to videotape an 8-year-old girl changing into a swimsuit. Investigators would eventually go on to find the tapes in Perez's Columbia home when they arrested him for that ID fraud. Sarah's sister EH ended up also testifying about the murder of Patricia Hughes. EH shared the painful recall that when the group moved to Angel's Landing, she moved into the master bedroom with Perez, and she was only 10 years old at that time.
Oh.
A few weeks after EH began staying with Perez in January of 2002, Perez began forcing EH to have oral, vaginal, and anal sex with him. And this went on for years. And this is where some of the rough stuff starts coming in.
I guess I also, and Bailey, maybe you can talk into that. Like, I understand it is natural for men to have a higher sex drive than females, right? I mean, I do understand that. But there's gotta be there's got to be a threshold, right? Where it's like, that's not a normal sex drive. Is that right? Like, it's got to get to a point where it's like, this is abnormal behavior for a man to want sex this much all the time, this frequently. Am I making sense? Like, is that normal behavior? Or is that something that you see with offenders, people who are sex addicts?
So sex addicts use a higher sex drive as the number one excuse in the book. Well, I can't help that I have a high sex drive. That's no, that's not how that works. I honestly, I don't think having a higher sex drive has anything to do with it,
Mhm.
right? Um, you know, I personally just don't. I think that it is an excuse to that's your scapegoat, right? To do this bad behavior. When the reality is there's lots of people, men and women in the world who have high sex drives and they just figure out a way to do it, whether they have, anonymous sex or hookups, right? But it's still consensual.
Mhm.
You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like if you want to have sex with 3 people a day, I mean, whatever, as long as it's consensual and they're not underage. You know what I mean? Like you can find a way to,
So, do you think it sounds to me that it's the engaging of sex might not be the core motive. It might be something else. It's just abusing or manipulating or power. You know what I
yeah.
is
Yeah,
that
I mean, yeah, it's either there's ulterior motives at play and they're just saying that they have a high sex drive. Yeah, or it's about power and control.
Mhm.
So EH also testified along with other witnesses that Daniel Perez would threaten to kill the girls if they didn't do what he told them to do, and he would
Mhm.
intimidate with them with a gun. After one instance of shooting a computer tower, he ordered the girls to go to the master bedroom of one of the houses. In the bedroom, Perez ordered EH and SH to the bed and KL to the corner. Perez then viciously sodomized the 2 girls with a bottle and then made the third girl drink from the bottle. He would tell the girls that they would need to essentially sacrifice themselves to save the other. If they resisted, he would threaten to kill their father or anybody that they loved.
Yeah.
He would tell his victims that they needed to share his bed with him because he was a seer who needed a pure person, meaning a young female virgin to take care of him or he would die.
Right.
The level of manipulation for these 8-year-old brains and 10-year-old brains, like to have the responsibility or to be told that your responsibility is if I don't do these things, this person's going to die,
Right. Right.
right? On the seventh day of testimony in a trial that took 3 years to bring before a jury, Daniel Perez took the witness stand for more than 4 hours. And it is no surprise to anyone here that Daniel Perez would testify in his own defense and that he had an answer for literally everything. Everything he claimed ranged from amnesia to misinterpretations, um, even regarding like these sex crimes. And there's so much here, and I'm just going to condense this and bullet kind of some of the main points. When Daniel Perez was questioned while he was on the witness stand, yeah, well, he was on the stand, why he assumed the alias of Lou Castro, a name that he carried until his arrest and federal charges in 2010. Perez, now 55, said that while he was on his way back to address his plea agreement in the 1997 Texas case with the sexual assault, he suffered an attack by 4 men and they beat him close to death and he lost his memory.
Mhm.
He said when he awoke, He saw Patricia Gomez, later known as Patricia Hughes because she married Brian, and she took him down to Brownsville, Texas, or Mexico, but he couldn't remember. He couldn't remember at the time. And she called him by Lou Castro, and he said at that point, moving forward, that's what he thought his name was, and that's what he thought his identity was.
No. I hate it. I really hate it when that happens. It really,
When you get kidnapped and beat to death almost, and then you forget who you are, and then your ex-girlfriend finds you and saves you and says your name is Lou, and you just go along with it, and you don't give your fingerprints ever because you don't remember why you don't want to do that, but you just know you shouldn't touch anything with your fingerprints or give fake names and social security
yeah,
numbers.
I really do. I hate it. Hate it when that happens to me.
This gets wild. Okay. When asked about his lavish spending, Perez claimed that he paid for it in cash from a red duffel bag. Now, Chelsea, this red duffel bag was given to him by Patricia Hughes after he lost his memory.
Yes.
The money likely came from a sale of a home and cars in a life he couldn't recall.
Sure.
He was like, yeah, I didn't work. Instead, I spent 6 years building Angel's Landing. And he said the women in his life controlled the finances. They bought the real estate,
Yeah.
initiated the buying of the life insurance policies. He denied asking anybody to falsify information. And with regard to the buying expensive cars, he said his role only in this, because he's the victim, was to scope out the vehicles and, quote, find the best deal, but that he didn't own any or know where the money for them came from.
Yeah. Well, and if Patricia were not already deceased, then I'm sure he was like, she's the one that should be on trial right now. She is the one who did all of this, and unfortunately she's deceased, which is just another mark on the side of my bad luck.
Yeah.
Whatever. Get off.
When the topics of raping when the topics of raping and assaulting young girls came up, I'm so sorry. This is not funny. His response is the most ridiculous shit I've ever heard, and I can't help but laugh. He told jurors that I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. Okay. Um, he told jurors that scar tissue that scar tissue from a penile injury he suffered in the 90s left him able to have sex only with a partner's cooperation, not not forcefully, as was alleged from numerous witnesses and testimony. So he was like, I have penis scars, and because of this, I can't have sex with anybody without the cooperation.
Okay. Okay, friend.
Oh. I'm so sorry. I hope you guys understand I am not laughing at the horrific nature of the victims. I am laughing at the just wild, bizarre brain that is Daniel Perez.
On this week in Sesame Street, the
Yeah,
word on the street
delusional.
is absurd.
Oh, God. Perez characterized his relationship with most of the women as being like, quote, a big brother. The
Yeah,
women that he did have sex with were willing and of consenting age,
sure.
not raped or underage. He said he shared a bedroom with an 11-year-old girl at Angel's Landing, but they did not share a bed. They shared a room, but not a bed. It was only later when she was older and of legal age when he had sex with her, but it was at her bidding.
Well, sure. And I'm sure the reason why she had to be in that room is because she had night terrors and he was the only person that she felt comfortable around. So again, hashtag not my fault.
When the prosecution naturally painted him as a vicious, manipulative cult leader, he suggested and corrected the prosecution, saying that he preferred the term seer, that it was merely a turn of phrase rather than a claim that he could foretell the future.
Mhm.
That when he referred to himself as special, it was a reference to special education.
Really?
That's what he said.
Really? Special education as in his ability to see in the future was that was under the category of special education? Or he
No,
himself?
no, he was saying what he said was when he would refer to himself as special, he was referring to himself as special ed, not special as in I'm an enlightened cult leader, angel reincarnated.
Okay. So
And everybody just misunderstood.
he had learning disabilities in some way, shape, or form. Is that
I
correct?
don't know. I mean, we couldn't even find fingerprints. I doubt we'll find high school records of this, right?
Okay. All right.
When asked whether he told one of his followers she would be reincarnated, he said, "No, we watch a lot of movies."
All right.
According to an article by Amy Renee Leiker in a quick exchange with Sedgwick County District Attorney Mark Bennett, Perez said that in regards to Patricia Hughes's death, he said that he was nowhere there. He was at a West Wichita car dealership searching for another vehicle.
They're searching for a good deal.
Searching for a good deal. Uh-huh.
Mhm.
He went through the story again that he stuck to since way back in 2003,
Mhm.
and then also kind of insinuated that it was not only just an accident, but she was suicidal and he was just helping her go through with what she wanted.
Oh, right.
And a medical expert for the prosecution concluded that there was no way that Patricia Hughes's death was accidental. She had bruises on the back of her head that were indicative of grip marks from behind. And the story that she had just fallen into the pool was not consistent with the injuries. She had a broken barrette in her hair, suggesting that someone had gripped her head and kept her there. So this is 4 hours of this man just being like, no, no, like my penis is scarred. That's why. Nope. We watch a lot of movies. Nope. I'm special education. Like the most ridiculous shit, right?
Yeah. Can you imagine being the juror during this? Can you imagine sitting there listening to this stuff and just being like, shut up,
Yeah.
shut up?
Yeah. So luckily, I think we all saw this coming. Luckily, the jury was like, no, no. On February 19th, 2015, in Sedgwick County District Court, Daniel Perez was found guilty on all 28 charges brought against him. A specific report from the Columbia Daily Herald outlined the charges, detailing 1 count of first-degree murder, 8 counts of rape, 7 counts of aggravated criminal sodomy, 3 counts of aggravated assault, 1 count of sexual exploitation of a child, and 8 counts of making false information.
Good.
At his sentencing hearing in March, presided over by Judge Joseph Brybeska, Perez received 2 life sentences and an additional 406 months for lesser charges, adding up to an effective sentence of no possibility of parole for 80 years.
Good.
He'll die before he gets the chance at parole.
I hope so.
Yeah.
We always say stuff like that, but
Yeah.
loopholes like
I mean,
Gladys.
Les is a 300-year-old angel and he lives until, 130,
I know, then shame on all of us.
right? Silly ducks. The case garnered significant national attention, highlighted by a Dateline NBC episode that featured and detailed the horrific events and the impact on the victims' families. Law enforcement officials such as the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Deputy Ron Goodwin characterized Perez as a dangerous sexual predator willing to commit heinous acts, including murder and rape, to achieve his desires.
Yeah.
Currently, Perez, who is now 65 years old, remains incarcerated at the Lansing Correctional Facility in Kansas. And the last thing that I wanted to close with was something from Sarah McGrath. If there's one message that Sarah hopes to convey, is that cults can find a way to entrap people without them even realizing it. She says, I don't think cults are common. I think that my situation was very uncommon. My mom just kind of accepted all of these whimsical things that he would tell her. She was just sucked into it. But I also think that people who are in a cult may not realize that they're in a cult until they've been out for a while. I didn't realize I was in a cult until I had been out for a few years.
Yeah.
And I think, I just wanted to end with that because I think it's overwhelming when we talk about it. We're like, how can you buy
Absolutely.
into this, right? But I think it's, ask any cult survivor that they're going to be like, it's very easy. And it happens like that before you even think it's happening.
Well, and again, to put it on a more well-known and a more commonly seen, I think it's so, for example, and I think the best way to describe how I feel about this is through a story. When Lucas and I first got married, or first got together, when Lucas and I first started dating, we started dating in March, and his birthday was in May. And so we had been dating, a hot, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, something like that. And I remember Lucas saying, it's my birthday. Did you make me a birthday cake? And I remember thinking, like, who are you? Like, what is wrong with you? Like, why would you think that I would make you a birthday cake? Because Lucas's mom, to this day, still makes custom birthday cakes for you on your birthday.
Yeah.
And I say that to say, for Lucas, it was not only was that absolutely normal, he had never known anything else, but then he also thought that everybody else's childhood, everybody else's life was that way. Right?
Yeah.
And so before everybody starts pointing fingers at like, how in the world could you believe something like that? I feel like if it's been like that for so long, not only do you think that it's normal, but you think everybody else's life probably looks like that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why getting out into like your college age years, meeting new people out of your bubble and you're like, what? People think this way, people do these things. So it's really no different, right? It's just, unfortunately, their normalcy is pretty twisted.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, Rick Allen Ross, one of the things that stood out to me in our interview with him is he said the best way that he gets people to understand cults and the dynamics of cults is he calls basically, he compares it to domestic violence. And he says, I basically say that domestic violence is a cult of two.
Oh.
And in a real cult, there's just more people involved.
Yeah.
And having worked a lot with, victims of interpartner violence or domestic violence and, seeing a lot from friends and families reports of like, how do they not see that this is dangerous, that this is toxic, that this person is bad, that this person is abusive, blah, 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 blah. Because it's so complex, right? And, I think we need to stop focusing on, and I don't think anybody here is blaming victims, but I think we need to stop focusing on what a victim should have or should not have done and start focusing on this was a sexual predator. Let's focus on what he should and should not have done. You know
Right.
what I mean? And I know that's
Absolutely.
common sense, but all too often I think it's like we accept that there's this evil force, and so we have to, like, put all of our focus on the victim side of it
Mhm.
instead of kind of tackling, and not accepting the fact that we're just letting these people, get away with stuff and do awful, horrible things to kids and victims.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. Because again, I think so often, people we don't talk about boundaries, right? Like in an everyday occurrence. We don't know we think we know what's in a
Yeah, we
normal.
talk about boundaries, but then people are literally like, "What is it?" Right? I
Right.
know I need to set boundaries, but how and what does it look like?
That's kind of exactly what I mean. Like you can say this word all day long, but so often it's like, okay, but what is it? Or how do I
Yeah.
set it? And again, for so many people, and this is where it gets into, cultural norms. There are boundaries that are acceptable within cultural norms. And that's where my stance is. I don't care how many ways you want to slice this cake, exploiting, especially sexually exploiting anybody who is not consenting. I don't care if you're 80 years old, 30 years old, or 8 years old. That is criminal. That is not okay.
Right. Yeah. And, like, literally, I've worked with non-adjudicated sex offenders and people who probably have it in them to become sex offenders, and it's scary, but it's interesting because, like, for example, talking about consent, they say, "Well, she didn't say no." Right? And then I, educate them on the trauma responses, and you have, like, freeze and fawn, and they're just like, "That's just a bunch of shit that therapists say
Yeah.
to, try to control people like me." And you're
Yeah.
just like, "Wow." Like, you
Yeah.
really believe that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or when I try to convey the concept of, like, power differentials and power dynamics, and how even if you're given consent, it might not be consensual because of the power dynamics at
Mm-hmm.
play,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can be a 30-year-old woman, and your boss who signs your paychecks, who has a lot of leverage and control in your life, can say, you have to say yes to this for you to continue getting what you want. And so, like, technically, was it consensual? I mean, the words were said, but it wasn't, right? There's too much of a power differential and a power dynamic at play. You know what I mean? It's complicated.
Yeah,
It's not as black
absolutely.
and white as people make it out to seem.
Sure. Well, I said literally to some ninth graders, a couple of days ago, and this girl had her water bottle on the desk, and this guy in front of her was wanting to drink out of her water bottle, right? Or her Stanley, whatever. And she was like, no. And I walked by and I was like, that is not yours. That is her water. You do not need to drink it if she does not want you to. And his response was, yeah, but she let me drink out of it last time.
Right.
And that's where I said, okay, but you have to ask permission every time. Just because she said it was okay one time doesn't mean that it's okay every time. And I feel like that needs to be said with water bottles. That needs to be said with personal space. That needs to be said with sexual interaction.
Yeah.
It needs to be okay every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was not fun for me.
No.
I would love some feedback from you guys to let us know what you thought about our wild side tastic cult episode.
Yeah. Well, I'm so thankful for the survivors. I'm so thankful for the strength that they found to come and testify against um, whatever his name is, Perez, because it's only because of the strength from people like you that any evil is ever able to be stopped. So thank you for the voice that you used. Thank you for the power that you found in that. And I hope that encourages anybody out there who's listening to also find the power to speak up and speak out.
Yep. Well, you guys, again, as always, thanks for hanging out with us through this wild and crazy ride.
And we will catch you on the wild side.
Bye, guys.
Later, Gators.
Hey, Wildside Tribe, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Wildside Podcast. Make sure to tune in on Wildside Wednesdays. New episodes will drop each Wednesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We would love to hear from you, so if you have a wild case recommendation, email us at wildsidepodcast@gmail.com. That's wildside with a C. Or share your thoughts in the comments below. As always, if you haven't heard it today, you're loved, you're worthy, and you're valuable. And we'll catch you on the flip side.